So hello my YouTube lovelies, and welcome to this episode upstairs to Bedfordshire. If you haven't, please subscribe and give us a thumbs up and a comment, because that would be really nice to have your input and be able to have a dialogue with you as an audience. What I forgot to mention in the previous episode, what the hell have I done? During that period of time where I was had just moved in and was moving bits and pieces out, the first thing I actually did do during that first couple of days was to varnish the walls. I wanted to originally give the van a very sort of natural look to it with the timber, but it didn't take long for marks etc. to sort of appear on the wood, so I decided to just give it a coat of varnish. I think ultimately this was to sort of seal it in ever so slightly and to give it some kind of waterproof property, and also I guess to bring out the grain, because I wanted the look of the timber and that grain finish, hence where a lot of the furniture components I've chosen particular parts of a sheet of timber. And in fact, when I chose the sheets of timber, I deliberately went with ones that had a very sort of grainy look to it, because I really liked that. So I did use a Ronsil satin clear varnish, and that was to basically, yeah, just give it a sealant as such, and it brought out the wood and made it slightly darker than I had originally intended, but at the end of the day it's not too bad, and quite frankly it does look quite nice, certainly in the evenings. It's not too dark and oppressive, it's still got a sort of a fairly light quality to it. The bed, well, the bed was a quite important part of my build. I spoke in a video some time ago, it was a vlog actually, where, sad as it may seem, I, as a child, used to quite like going to bed. Certainly when I lived with my father at the time, and I had a bunk bed which I would share occasionally with, well, not share the bunk bed, but you know, there was a bunk bed because I shared the room with my sister. And I used to sort of look forward to going to bed, and I used to sort of pretend that my bed, sleeping underneath the bottom part of the bunk, was my truck, and I used to sort of fantasize driving to a service station etc., and then closing off the engine and then getting into the back of the cab and going for a sleep. And I don't know, I think it was round about the time of the movie Convoy. If you haven't seen the movie Convoy, I suggest you see it. It is a classic film, and that sort of whole trucker vibe and everything has always stuck with me for all my life. So the thought of being able to get into a really nice snug bed was kind of really it resonated with me for some time. And the bed is obviously a place that I spend however many hours of a day, whether it be 7 or 8 hours. So it was important that it was a really, really comfortable space. So there was a lot of thought that went into the bed area. I always knew that it had to be a static bed, a bed that I never had to make up all the time, so it was always there, so that was really important to me. It had to go lengthways because I'm 6'2", so there was no way that I was going to be able to sleep widthways, and it needed to incorporate a garage space underneath. So a lot of time was spent sat in the empty van. I remember sat here on the wheel arch just looking across and looking at the wall and the space and measuring with my tape and putting my bike in, and originally the intention was that the bike would go in properly. I didn't have to take any of the front wheel off or anything like that. I wanted to be able to put it in completely built, but that meant that the bike was going to the bed rather was going to be too high, and it would have been literally like going to bed in a coffin. And I had messed about, and it took me ages. I was deliberating for ages and ages and ages, and because I've got quick release wheels anyway, I just thought, well, what happens if I just take that front wheel off, because it's fairly easy to take on and off, and just by doing that and lowering the bike onto its forks, onto the front forks, it actually gave me, I think it was something like 10 or 11 centimeters extra clearance, and believe me, 10 or 11 centimeters does make a difference. So anyway, that's where I went with that, and once I'd sort of had a concrete idea with the height and everything, I was able to start building. The other kind of goal that I had, or ambition that I had with this van, was that everything that I was going to put in furniture wise had to have the ability to be able to come out. So believe it or not, not so much now, but pretty much for the most part, this right hand side of the van now with the heating installed etc is probably not as easy to do, but everything that has been put into this van can all come out, and I can basically convert this van back into a panel van if I wanted to. Probably take me maybe about half a day or so, maybe less, I don't know, but it is possible. So that was the thinking, that everything that I put in furniture wise was able to sort of clip in. So I use these they're called clip pins, I think, and they basically sit into a open hinge, so the butt of the hinge has been taken off, so you've just got the flap back hinges, and then you insert a clip pin or a loop pin depending on what sort of pin you want to use. These are things that I use in the theatre set building and film set building industry. So with these, it enables me to take out these and basically pull out individual items of furniture. The beds, obviously, as I said, it had to be a static permanent fixture. So once I'd got that height sorted, I was then able to start building the frames. So I built the initial frame out of 2x2 timber. The reason why I use 2x2 is because it's fairly chunky. I needed to sort of make sure that it could take my weight and maybe someone else's, who knows. And it had to sort of be a fairly sort of stable structure. So I used a 2x2, and I started with the framework that went against the wall on the far side, on the right hand wall, and that frame was built so it kind of overlapped the wheel arch, and then I built the front end of it. And because I'd found this storage box, I found it at work, so I got this for free. I wanted to utilise as much storage as possible underneath this bed, whether it be garage space that could be accessed from the back or stuff that I could use from the front. So this storage space I put on at an angle, which then made a storage area for food and dried goods and things like that, so that I was able to access that from the inside of the sort of interior cabin. that had to go on an angle. The idea of putting it on an angle was that also it basically meant that I didn't have this big corner protruding into the cabin area, so it was easier to navigate past and everything, and it does make a big difference of just having that corner chopped off. I think there's a name that the motorhome industry give for beds that have that corner taken off, but I can't recall what it is. If I remember, I'll insert it in the text. So yeah, the front framework was built, and then I built the side framework, which would then incorporate at a later date the wall, which sort of separated the bedroom area from the wardrobe and the tool shed, etc. So once I'd built the frames, I then assembled those frames in the workshop and built it as one complete frame. And I then basically put braces, 2x2 braces that went across the top, so that was to sort of keep the thing square and structural, but also to sort of hold my weight as well. And I then put some board over the top. I think it was, I can't remember now what type of board it was. It's this composite board that's made up of wood chips, and I think, if memory serves me right, it was something like 8 or 9 mil. The reason why I put this in was I didn't want any heat to escape, so I wanted to I knew that the garage would be inherently quite a cold space, so it was to try and reduce any cold air coming up from the garage into the bedroom area. Also, maybe whether there was smells, whether from the bike or wet clothing or anything like that. And that board, once that went on and once I chopped off the corner, etc., that was able to sort of keep that whole framework really, really square and very, very stable and quite strong. I then added some extra supports down the centre again, so there was no chance that there was going to be any bowing with my body weight in there at all. So I probably went overboard, to be honest with you, but that's kind of the way I roll, I guess. Once I'd done that, I was able to sort of lift that whole framework and put it into the van, and it checked that it all fitted correctly, and I was able to sort of bring my bike in and just double check that the bike would fit in, etc., and it was sort of, the height was all correct and the bike was easy enough to get in and out, bearing in mind that the only adjustment that I have on the bike is literally taking the front wheel off. I don't have to adjust the seat or anything like that. I wanted as minimal adjustment to my bike so that it was a fairly easy process of just bringing in and taking out and sort of putting the wheel on and going for a ride, and there was no having to faff around with it all the time. Once that was done, I was then able to then secure the frame to the floor and the wall using these said clip pins or the pin hinges. And then once that was done, it was now time to sort of then look at the actual structure for where the bed was going to lie on. Now, at this stage, and now looking back in hindsight, I probably didn't need to go as far as what I did now, because I would have saved myself a lot of weight had I not built the next bit. But I did it, and the thinking behind it was because at this stage where you've just got that plain timber, most people would then just create a huge Swiss cheese and just drill loads and loads of air holes in there. But because my thinking was that I didn't want the air holes there, because I didn't want any moisture or cold air to come from the garage up, etc., and I didn't want to lose heat going into the garage, I wanted as much as possible to keep that a sort of a fairly well sealed unit. So in order to have air, I could have bought the stuff that you get from the marine industry, which is a sort of a mesh which you can sort of cut and lay down, and it just raises your mattress ever so slightly to give you an air gap. But I just decided to build my own sort of bed frame, so I used 2x2 lengths, and then using a crosscut saw I was able to sort of groove out channels, and then within those channels at measured distances I was able to then put a 2x1 batten going across. And so basically I built myself a bed frame, but it had, as it sat on the board, it had a natural air gap, so there was an airflow that could go underneath. And then the other thing that I did was, once I'd built that whole bed frame unit, I then basically used a 2x1 trim that I put all the way around the edge of the bed, and that 2x1 edging was basically to secure that bed frame, so there was no way that the bed could sort of move or slide around during transit and stuff. So probably I could have saved myself a bit of weight had I not done that, but it's done now, and I don't know how much it weighs. Not a huge amount. And the adjustments that I've done to the bed since is I did actually cut some holes in the end of the timber sheet that was on top of the garage. So I have managed to cut some holes there, because in the end I figured that actually there wasn't a huge amount of loss in terms of air, etc., and the smells or the cold air coming up I didn't think was going to be an issue. So I've since, during the lockdown, I cut some holes, and I can't tell a difference, to tell the truth. And so cutting those holes was an attempt of just trying to basically save a little bit of weight. So I managed to cut out, I think it was like 6 panels or something from the timber that was underneath. And you know, I've still kept its structural integrity, it's still strong enough, it still takes my weight, etc. So that's kind of pretty much the building of the bed. There was the thinking behind the garage was, obviously there's a fair few things I wanted to put in there. I didn't want to overload it, but everything that's in that garage is all compartmentalized in that I've got boxes. I bought boxes specifically that could go in there. There is actually a side panel, the wall of the bed that goes towards the wardrobe, that is actually velcroed on, so I can actually take this side panel off, which is sort of next to the angle part of where the cupboard is, where the drawers are rather, and that side panel can come off, and I can actually access the garage from inside the van as well if I wanted to. With regards to the beds, originally I had an air mattress, and once I'd gone through one of those I then bought myself another one, and then that one died a death, and I was intending to get a purpose-built mattress that was cut, etc., to shape, but I found a single mattress lying around at my work, and it looked in pretty good nick and was fairly clean, and so I put that in. And since I've put this in, the comfort of my bed is sublime. It's absolutely amazing. I absolutely love my bed. It is the most coziest place in my van, and getting up into it is fairly easy. I just sort of put a foot on the wheel arch, and then I just hoik myself up with an arm or a hand onto the bookshelf, and then I just clamber in, and getting out is fine. I just dangle over and jump off. But it is a really comfortable space. I think this bed area, and this bed in particular, I've probably had some of the best night's sleeps I've ever had. It really is super comfy. I can just about sit up in bed, believe it or not, so I can kind of squish up to the back and sit up and read a book, and that's really nice. And I incorporated on the headboard, because I didn't want to just go straight to the back doors. The headboard is like a false wall which can come out, and you'll see that in the next episode. but I incorporated a sliding door in there, so believe it or not, I can actually slide that door and put my hand and arm down and just about reach the inner control for the door and open the door. And I've not tried it, but I've managed to get my shoulders through, so I could potentially get out there in an emergency if I needed to. The bed is just a wonderful thing. I love sitting in there. I love the aspect of sitting with my head against there and just looking down the length of the van, and yeah, it reminds me a little bit of a narrowboat. So a space which I thought about long and hard, deliberated for quite a while prior to building it, but that time spent, I think, was well worth it. So that's the end of this episode. The next one is Not the Sharpest Tool in the Shed. Talks about the building of the shed area, and the next one after that will then talk about the cupboard in front of that. But I hope you've enjoyed this particular episode. Again, if you've got any questions or any comments, etc., please jot them down, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Cheers.